Inflation is everywhere and always a monetary phenomenon. And that means that something is changing. And I'm going to tell you right now, the reason why you have inflation is because the denominator is getting bigger. The supply of money is getting bigger. And your numerator, the cash that you have or the dollars that you have, is shrinking relative to that denominator. That's what inflation is. And that's why you should care. If you want to understand the world, you need to study fiat money.
Hello, everyone. I have a very exciting episode for you today. This man has been a huge influence in my Bitcoin journey as well as so many others. He is the author of the book, Fiat Ruins Everything, host of the Bitcoin Fixes This podcast, and most importantly to me personally, he is one of the most dedicated, toxic Bitcoin maxis out there who I wish I would have listened to back in 2017 when I was filling my bags with shitcoins thinking all these Bitcoiners were just mean and narrow-minded. This is Jimmy Song, my man. Thank you so much for joining me today, brother.
Thanks for that lovely introduction. And looking forward to talking about all things fiat.
Yes. So you literally wrote the book. You're just holding it up. Fiat ruins everything. And we use this phrase so much on this podcast, and anyone else who listens to other Bitcoin podcasts know this is the true dirty F word that people need to understand. And it's become so ingrained sort of in our speech that we just throw it out there to refer to all of these problems in society. But I thought this would be an excellent chance to really dive into what that word means with you. So why don't you just give us a 101? What is fiat?
Yeah, so the word fiat comes from Latin, and it's basically "let it be done," something like that. So if you're familiar with Genesis 1:3 in Latin, it literally says "fiat lux," "let there be light," right? And that's where the word comes from. It's fiat, let there be. So when people were saying fiat money, it was literally "let there be money," right? Like the money that is created from nothing. Now, if we're God, then yeah, you can create things out of nothing. But if you're a man, you're not really creating anything out of nothing. It's just sort of like a weird accounting trick to steal from a lot of people and get it out there. So fiat in English started to become, it changed its meaning a little bit from Latin. It's instead of "let it be done," it became, something created out of nothing. So when we say fiat money, it's money created out of nothing, or judicial fiat, right? Like a judge says this has to be done and everyone has to obey, something like that. It's sort of like a declaration, sort of creating things out of existence, out of nothing, just by say so. And of course, real life doesn't work that way. It's you always need some resources from somewhere. Somebody needs to, if you say "let there be a basketball court," somebody needs to pour the concrete and put up the basketball hoops and stuff like that. You can't just dictate that. But this is the conceit of socialists and people in power, authoritarians, and so on, that they think that they can. And if you are sort of like power drunk, this is the conceit that you always have. But yeah, fiat means "let there be," and it's now become sort of like a derisive adjective at this point. It went from a verb to sort of like a different kind of adjective to now like sort of derisive one, where we use it as a stand-in for all of the ways in which this conceit has caused things to become crappy. So when we say, "Oh, that's so fiat," we're really talking about like the entire system of fiat money, the bureaucracy, the money printing, the theft, the rent seeking, all of that sort of like combining to make existence sort of like filled with friction, gatekeepers, lack of entrepreneurship and things like that. It's all just sort of like from that system. So that's what we mean when we say fiat.
Yeah, and one of the things that you mentioned there, which I think is key for the people really trying to just connect the dot for the physical realm, what it means is just the money printer. We're talking about fiat money. We're talking about there is a small group of people at the very top of the hierarchy who can print money for themselves, and they say, "Oh, it'll trickle down." We heard this term "trickle down economics." It'll come down. Like it's okay that we can print trillions of dollars. but that doesn't really tend to happen. It tends to just stay at the very top. The rich keep getting richer, the poor keep getting poorer, and the middle class just getting squeezed out by this phenomenon. So, in terms of just why people should care about this is something I'm always trying to work on with my friends, family, and acquaintances. Is they hear us Bitcoiners just talking about money, money, money all the time. We're always talking about, oh, we need to fix the money, we need sound money, fiat money is bad. They tend to think like, man, these people are just obsessed with money. I'm not an investor. I don't own a house. Like, I'm not really into stocks, so I don't really care about this stuff. But Jimmy, why do you think everyone on Earth should care about the money?
Yeah, and that's an excellent question, because even though you might not care about money, you actually do if you do any shopping at all, and you can see it very plainly in the inflation that we're all experiencing. I just went to Costco, and the 4-pack of bacon is $16.99, right? Like 4 years ago, this was $8.99. I could get a 4-pack of bacon for $8.99, and so it's basically doubled in price in 4 years. So what the heck happened? Well, the fact of the matter is, it's fiat money, fiat money that keeps expanding, and it's coming home to roost. We always talk about like the national debt and things like that, and saying, oh, it's our children that will be paying for it, or our children's children. Well, we're the children, and we're paying for it right now, and we're paying for it in the form of inflation. All of that extra money that gets printed, either at the federal level, at the corporate level, even at the personal level through mortgages and so on, it has an effect. And you're paying for it right now in the form of this invisible, unlegislated, completely opaque and, completely not obvious tax called inflation, and you're paying for it constantly. And if you're having trouble, like paying for your grocery bill, or you're having to adjust your lifestyle because of inflation, well, that this is why you should care about the money. If you don't understand where the inflation comes from, or worse, you're believing the lies that everyone is telling you. The Elizabeth Warrens and the Kamala Harrises say, oh, it's corporate greed, and they're like price gouging or something like that. Their margins are 1.5%. There's no price gouging here. In fact, they're like, from what I hear about like grocery stores, the thing that their loss leader right now is beef, because they're trying to keep the prices lower, just to like not make just to get people in. People buy beef all the time, but they're losing money on the beef that they're selling for $19 a pound. Like, think about what that means. They're selling it at $19 a pound. They're probably having to acquire it at 20, and they're only doing that so that you come in and buy all the crappy products in the middle aisle, so that they can make a profit off of those. This is kind of the strategy that they have. So inflation is why you should care, because the money it matters deeply. And if you don't understand the causes of inflation, then you really need to study money a little bit, because it's not Beyonce, it's not like all these ridiculous like reasons for inflation. Inflation is everywhere and always a monetary phenomenon, and that means that something is changing. And I'm going to tell you right now, the reason why you have inflation is because the denominator is getting bigger. The supply of money is getting bigger. And your numerator, the cash that you have, or the dollars that you have, is shrinking relative to that denominator. That's what inflation is. And that's why you should care, because if you don't understand it, it's just you're going to invite more tyranny. You're going to invite stuff like price controls, which Kamala Harris has already floated. You're going to get long lines. You're going to get black markets. You're going to get the rich getting richer, the poor getting poorer, and the middle class absolutely gutted. And that's something that I think most people recognize, right? Since 1971, pretty much the entire industrial base of the United States has been completely gutted. And why is that? Well, if you study fiat money, you would know. But if you don't, then it's just sort of like, oh, I guess something happened. I don't know. If you want to understand the world, you need to study fiat money.
Yeah, it's like people have been just programmed to not really use their critical thinking skills and just look at the economy as a system and just realize everyone's getting better at working together. We have all these new tools, all this new infrastructure, all these new technologies in order to make products and goods and services more cheaply. So why do I have to pay more money? Why am I why am I like poorer than ever? This is like the richest country in the history of the world, and everyone's broke. Like so many people, you probably know the stats better than me, but so many people out there are living paycheck to paycheck, hand to mouth. People aren't able to really grow. If anything, they're just trying to stay afloat right now, and people aren't putting that together. They keep listening to the politicians, like you said, blaming everything but the money printer, and it's election season right now. It's just peak clown world narratives being pushed out there for like why people are struggling and how they're going to fix it by controlling more things. They never talk about the money printer or the debt. And I pulled up a tweet from James Lavish last night. He put it well. He said $35 trillion of debt plus another $218 trillion of unfunded liabilities, and not a peep from either candidate about it. And we've been watching all of these politicians come on and talk about how they're going to fix everything. They never talk about that number, the debt, the huge debt bomb that's sitting there. And I'm not sure if you've seen the meme. There's a meme of a dad holding his infant and reading out of a children's book, and on the title of the book it says $35 trillion of federal debt and what you will owe. So basically this idea that this huge debt bomb is just looming in the shadows. It's creeping up behind us, Jimmy. And people have a feeling that this is probably not a good thing, but I mean that number is just so big, no one really comprehends what it even means. So could you put a little bit of meat on that bone of what does this debt number actually mean, and why should people really care about it more than anything else, I would say?
Yeah, so the national debt is just the accumulation of all the deficits that the government has run over the years, right? And a vast majority of it is since 1971, for example. But basically, you have a budget, right? You have revenues of say $4 trillion, and you have expenditures of $6 trillion. That adds $2 trillion to the debt. That's basically it. So where does that extra money come from, right? Like how do you you're spending $6 trillion, you have $4 trillion in tax receipts. Where does the $2 trillion come from, right? And this is what the Treasury works on, and they sell something. They sell bonds called Treasuries, right? That this is literally supposed to be the safest asset in the world, risk-free asset, basically. But this is what they sell into the market to make up for that gap. And there are lots of buyers of treasuries, including private investors, but more like other central banks, right? Because if they have to defend the peg against their currency, but not all of it gets bought. So if there's a gap there, right? Say you sell $500 billion worth of U.S. treasuries into the market. Well, where's the other $1.5 trillion comes from? Well, this is where you have the lender of last resort. This is the Federal Reserve, the central bank that buys it and puts it on their balance sheet. And now they have treasuries on their balance sheet. Where did they get that money? They printed out of nothing. So this 35 trillion number is some with other central banks and so on. But most of it is just money that gets expanded, right? Like the denominator keeps getting bigger as a result. So when you create money out of nothing, then the denominator gets bigger, your dollars are worth less. So ultimately, who pays for it? Well, it's us. We pay for it in the form of inflation, right? And it's right now we're seeing a lot of food inflation and things that we buy every day. But the inflation's been happening for a very long time. Look at housing prices, right? Like what's happened with those? Look at the PE multiples of public stocks, right? Like what's happened to those? Well, a lot of that has inflated up because those tend to store value better, so people put it into those. So you get a lot of people that are owning homes that put it into homes rather than keeping it in dollars because they're debasing so fast. So you get asset inflation. You get home price. If you're wondering like as somebody that's fairly young, hey, why can't I afford a home? It's like $800,000. Well, there's your answer. It's because of inflation, right? It's all the money printing. Where that money's going somewhere. It's not. It's not going into your pocket. It's going into the pockets of the people that own homes already, right? That own stocks already. This is what's happening, right? That's probably the first level of inflation, but we're now getting to like the second, third, fourth levels of inflation, where you're seeing it in the grocery store, where my bacon that was $9 is now 17, right? Like that. This is what's actually happening. That number means that it's expanding. Now, the other number that you brought up is the 200 plus trillion dollars of unfunded liabilities. What's going to happen with those? Well, the government can cancel them, in which case, whatever government does that will be voted out of office almost immediately. So think of that as money that they're going to have to print in the future, right? This is monetary expansion that you should be anticipating over the next 30, 40 years. It's not going to stay at 35 trillion. It's going to get to 200 trillion. It's going to get to possibly 300 trillion at some point in time in the next 30 years. In which case, well, okay, like there's going to be even more inflation and all that stuff. But that's how you can contextualize it, is that it's really a tax, right? When you print $2 trillion out of nothing, it's a tax on all of us. It's just not explicit. It's not, you own a home, so we're going to charge you property tax. You're consuming something, we're going to charge you sales tax. You're working for somebody, so we're going to charge you income tax and payroll tax on the other side. Yeah, I mean, like there are all kinds of taxes. And if you raise any of those, people complain like crazy. But you do it through inflation. And because we're sort of like gaslit to believe that it's a corporate greed or something, we don't connect the dots and realize ultimately this is a tax. Inflation is a tax. You're paying more for your house because you're paying a tax. You're paying more for your bacon or burgers or fruit or whatever because it's a tax. They're all taxes. You just don't realize it. And that this is ultimately what's happening to you, is that the government is stealing your money, right? Taxation is theft. And, at least with like explicit taxes, you vote for somebody and they vote for it, and you can you have some recourse. With this, it's completely non-transparent. It's completely opaque. And you have no idea what's going on, who's doing it, or why they're doing it, or what's going, what's actually happening. It just sort of happens, and you have to take it in the form of inflation.
Yeah, and the way that I explain it to people is basically that it's a stealth tax. It's the hidden tax that they're able to completely hide from view, and just it's like the frog boiling in the pot rather than just being thrown straight on to like sear at high heat. It's really slow burning, and people are getting poorer so slowly that people aren't really revolting. They don't know what's going on. All they know is that their bill keeps going up and everything's getting more expensive. But like you said, since it happens slowly, they're able to deploy all of these nonsense narratives to confuse people about what's really going on. They pull out things about, it's the supply chains are down, it's COVID, it's the corporations are greedy all of a sudden, and this and that, and Beyonce concert, Taylor Swift concert. It's like those are real headlines that they've come up with to say that these people playing concerts are causing inflation. Anything but the money printer that is printing trillions of dollars and diluting the money supply, like you said. And I also use the analogy of, when, like, think about the McDonald's dollar menu. Like, people used to be able to buy a burger for $1, and I don't even know how much it is now. I haven't been there in a while. Like, what, $6 or $7? And you got the Subway $5 foot long. They had to throw that out. It's like it's going up to $8, $10, whatever it is now. And it's not because a foot long got more valuable. If anything, it got way less valuable because their inputs that they put into the food are even more terrible and full of chemicals. As you study the food as well. And you had Matthew Leshak on. I talked to him specifically about the Fiat food, which is a very fascinating rabbit hole in its own. So these things aren't getting more valuable over time. It's like you said, the denominator, your money is getting less valuable over time. So you're able to buy less with your currency. And when you look further down the line, you see a situation like Venezuela. People here in the U.S. think, that's just because, that's just some third world country. That would never happen to us. but every single fiat currency is on that exact same track of just going closer and closer and closer to its intrinsic value of zero. It's just monopoly money, pieces of paper. Is there anything you'd add to that?
Yeah, and you can see this in a lot of different places at various points of the hyperinflation story. And you can go to a place like Argentina or Lebanon. I've been to both those places, and you can physically see it, right? Like you go to any store, they have a big money counting machine because no one wants to count out like 100 bills to get pay for something small. But they want dollars, right? Everyone wants dollars because it's a lot better than the local currency, and menus are changing. Yeah, relatively speaking, and the menus are the prices are always like whited out and stuff like that because they have to keep raising them. But the reason why those places have hyperinflation is because they're printing the currency, and they get into kind of a weird trap because what happens is the prices that tend to rise last are income, right? Because if you have a contract with somebody, you're going to have to wait until the end of the contract to charge more or something like that. So especially with labor contracts, they don't get negotiated all that frequently. Whereas like if you have a contract for food for your grocery store, I mean, you usually get 30 days and then you have like a new shipment or whatever. But labor, it tends to be like, okay, you have a 6-month contract, you have a 2-year contract or whatever. You can't adjust the prices of labor that quickly, whereas you can with something like food or houses or whatever, because there's sort of like a liquid market for them. So what tends to happen is that labor goes up in price last, in which case everyone's labor gets debased, right? And once it goes up, well, the extra money that each laborer gets spent into the economy really quickly. And what's worse is that if you have a significant number of people that are employed by the government, well, they keep demanding raises to like basically survive. And oftentimes they stop doing work, get a second job in the private sector just to make ends meet. But they demand raises, and because they become such a big part of any government, you need their support, whether in votes or just like administrative support or whatever. So they get that. That they get that raise. Well, where does that raise come from? Well, it's printed out of nothing. Well, then that money gets spent into the economy, making the inflation worse, and soon they're asking for another raise, and you get into this vicious cycle where the money goes into the economy, causes inflation, causes the government employees to say we need a raise. And all this takes time, and then they get the raise, and then it gets spent into and it's a vicious cycle. And this is the cycle of hyperinflation, usually the way it plays out. And this was definitely the case in Lebanon and to a large degree in Argentina. If you look at the number of employees in their public sector, it's something like 18-19%. So it's a significant part of their economy, and you can see this in countries where things are starting to unravel a little bit. Maybe they're not quite as far along as Lebanon or Argentina, but you can look at places like Egypt or Turkey and places like that where they're starting on this cycle where and you'll read like a news item saying these government employees were striking and they got their raise or something. And it's like, okay, that's starting to happen. And lest you think, those are third world countries, it can't happen here. Well, if you add up state, local, and federal employees in the United States, it takes up something like 18-19% of our labor force. So this is a cycle that could definitely happen, and it's a hyperinflationary scenario. That especially if the dollar loses its reserve currency status, which it's starting to. Let's face it, Russia is never using the dollar again, ever. And there are lots of its allies that are, trying to look for alternatives to the dollar. So if that happens, well, then you've just cut off half the world, or cut off the dollar market to half the world. There's not as much demand. you can't print as much, right? Like part of how they manage the currency by the central bank is seeing how much of a demand there is, and trying to figure out through interest rates how to make the demand go up. And part of why they raise interest rates is to make the demand for the dollar go up. And hey, we're printing a little less or whatever. They've had to raise it to like 5.5% to get some of these other countries and companies and people with money to take treasuries. So I mean that should tell you like the dollar system is starting to break down. And there's going to be some more inflation on the way, and this is it's just kind of like an inevitable endpoint of debasement and hyperinflation. It's going to happen at some point. What are you going to do about it?
And as a result of people just having the wool over their eyes for so long, specifically in the U.S., and just told that everything is fine. All these other countries are having these problems, but that won't happen to us. Because we're the big strong America. We don't have any of those issues. When really we just have more can kicking abilities. Because like you said, we have the global reserve currency. We have the biggest, baddest money printer in all the land. And so we can just continue to print the global reserve currency that everyone else has, every other country even has to work for. And so we've had this tremendous cheat code of just being able to avoid these things for so long. And like you said, the cracks are starting to show. These other countries are starting to just say, I don't want to have anything to do with that anymore. It just doesn't make sense. And we see in El Salvador, they used to use the dollar as their primary currency because the one that they had before that was just so trash. So they switched to dollars. And then they decide after a while, like, you know what, like they just keep printing all this money. That's inflating our currency too. Everyone else in the world is using dollars because their previous currencies were even worse. They're starting to realize like they just don't want to have any connection to us anymore, and for good reason. So Nayib Bukele in El Salvador said, let's go to Bitcoin. Let's just skip all these steps of trying to just find new fiat currencies from other governments that are, less bad than ours. They're just going to go to an actual sound money. So I guess that wouldn't be a bad time to actually bring Bitcoin into this conversation. So we hear a lot of talk about sound money. Well, let's start from a good basic level here. This is another thing us Bitcoiners say. We talk about how fiat is bad and sound money is good. We need sound money again. We're talking about Austrian economics, this idea that, for a long time it was gold, and now we have Bitcoin in the conversation. These forms of money that cannot be printed like this fiat that we've been talking about. So add a little bit of color to why having this form of money that's actually scarce and follows the rules of nature is a solution to this problem we've been talking about.
Yeah, so for a long time, money was decentralized, right? Like, and you had lots of different forms of money. Salt was money. That's where you get the word salary, for example. You have other stuff like, they had rhinestones, glass beads, wampums, all kinds of stuff. Basically, the main thing was it had to be hard to produce, and it had to be scarce, basically. And if you had those two qualities and reasonable divisibility, fungibility, and all that, then it became money. And there were lots of these things, but the thing that won was gold. The reason why was because it is extremely hard to produce. There was an entire science called alchemy where people were trying to figure out ways to produce it without having to dig underground in gold mines and so on. So it didn't really work. And to this day, it is extremely expensive to create gold, right? Like it's you can do it in a nuclear physics lab, but it's going to be like atoms at a time and not like the nuggets that we're used to and so on. The problems with gold and silver, silver has very similar properties, where when the government started sort of meddling. Now, like initially it was really good. The Lydian kings in the 7th century BC started issuing coins, right? And these were called electrum. They were a gold and silver alloy. And these were the very first ones. And you might not know about the Lydian kingdom, but you've probably heard of their kings. You've heard of Midas and Croesus, and these were like really, really rich kings, right? Like, and that's what mythologically they had. And the reason was because they introduced, coins. This was a way to do accounting much easier, because before then you had to bring like a lump of gold and it had to get weighed and they had to give you change and all this other stuff. It became very complicated. But with these coins, now it was okay. You have to trust these guys a little bit, but they're always going to be this much gold or silver into this coin. Now that was great, and it made the Lydian kings very, very rich, because people wanted to use it, and they would bring their gold to get minted at their minting factory, basically, and they would get to keep a little bit of the gold as a price for minting it. And this was very profitable, and it made trade a lot faster, made it a lot easier, and so on. But then debasement started coming in, right? So the coin was supposed to say, okay, this contains this much weight of gold or silver, but then they said, oh, you know what? Like, if we just add a little bit of this other material, we could we can get even more money. They were stealing, they were debasing the currency. And this is actually where the word sound money came from, because if you flip a gold coin, it makes a particular sound depending on the purity. So you could literally hear how pure it was. And this was one of the many tricks that people came up with as a way to figure out, okay, how pure is this? Another one is actually biting it, right? Like you see these pictures from the Olympics of like athletes like biting their medals or whatever, but people actually used to do it because gold is actually a little more malleable the purer it is. So you can tell just by biting it or flinging it up, how pure it is. That debasement of the metal, the sort of like money printing that's happening through that, was the reason why you had this term sound money. It's unadulterated money, right? It's good. It makes a good sound, right? And that's what we want in an economy, because if you have somebody that can dilute the money, well, then they have all the power because they can print money. It used to be with gold and silver and coins like that, a lot harder to debase the currency, but the Romans managed over a period of a few hundred years, particularly under Emperor Diocletian, to do that. And this is part of the reason why Rome fell, was because they kept diluting the currency, and you couldn't really pay soldiers. Like at a certain point, when it's too diluted, people stop taking the money, right? Because it's no good. They wanted sound money. Instead, they got like diluted money, money that wasn't good, and they just sort of refused to take it. And this is the end of hyper inflation as well, is when people just refuse to trade in that currency. You go to Venezuela, now it's legal tender there, so you're forced to take it, but give anyone a choice, they would always take dollars over their Venezuelan bolivar, because it's not good money, right? And this is how sort of money dies, is when enough people just sort of refuse to take it. And that's the fate of fiat currency, because it debases to a point where you have to have so many units of it to buy anything. But why sound money is good, because it has a scarcity that you cannot sort of subvert, and that's ultimately what you want out of money, is a money that isn't changing constantly, so you can predict the future and plan and do things, and act with some knowledge of what could be in the future, instead of, I have no idea what's going to happen in the future, so I might as well just do whatever right now, including spend all my money because I think they're going to dilute it, and which is what a lot of people in hyperinflationary systems do. So, that ends up destroying society. Whereas having sound money, having predictable money, having money that you can plan with, build civilization. So that would be the reason why sound money is just so important.
Yeah, and as I was telling you before we recorded, I've been traveling around South America, and I've gotten to hear some really interesting stories, people telling about, their youth and their family when they were in these countries that went through hyperinflation. And like you talked about, there is no long-term thinking at all. It
Mm.
really just reduces people's minds and their thought process of the second that they get any form of payment from their job or however they get money, they are incentivized to immediately spend it because
Mm.
it's going to be less valuable the next day. So they
Mm.
might as well just spend it all while it's the highest it'll be. And so they have to, the stores have to have these rules, like they only let a certain amount of people in at a time, or else there'll just be a bum rush on every payday. And it just causes madness, and it causes people to just lose this ability to plan for the future, like you said. And that has a huge ramification, obviously, on all of society. And I'd love to dig more into that idea of savings soon. But first, I just want to, really highlight this, what you've been talking about here, because that's such a great foundation of how, we've been seeing the same problem happen over and over throughout history, like so many other things, where um, the government will always try to gain the power to print their own money and create their
Mm.
own money. Something we sort of glazed over, though, was gold was really good for a long time. Like for
Mm.
thousands of years, gold was an excellent form of money, which helped people save. When you
Mm.
got a gold coin from your grandma as a little kid, if you held it for your whole life, it would be worth more at the end of your life, which is just a totally foreign concept to us now. If my grandma would always give me $10 when I was a little kid, and I just thought that was so amazing. I'd be able to buy so much stuff with this $10, and now it buys way less, obviously. So we've lost this ability to just save money. So why don't we talk about just this power of savings? I know
Mm.
a lot of people are familiar with the word, but I don't think they really know how much power is in this function of an economy, the ability for people to save money for themselves, lock it away, and know that it will buy something in the future. How does that affect people?
Yeah, so this is more an economics question, and this is what an economist would call capital formation, right? If you have the ability to save, you can do more long-term projects, and almost anything worth making is going to take a really long time. So, Safety in his book, The Bitcoin Standard, talks about fishing. And initially people caught with their hands, and you can maybe catch like one fish a day, something like that, if you're catching with your hands. But if you take the time to create a fishing pole, that might take a few days to go and make a fishing pole that's effective. Now, there's some capital needed in order to go and create that fishing pole, right? You need to survive at least, and save up a few more fish so that you can go and make that fishing pole. That's a form of savings. So you need that savings to create that fishing pole. But after you create that fishing pole, now you can maybe catch 3 or 4 fish a day. Okay, great. And that creates another virtuous cycle where now you can maybe sell a few of those fish because you don't need to eat all of them, and build a home, or get clothes for yourself or whatever. But at a certain point, maybe 4 fish a day is not enough. So you start saving some of those fish, so that you can build a boat. And a boat is not going to take a few days; it might take like 3 weeks, right? So you have to save up for 3 weeks. This is the idea of saving. And after you save for 3 weeks, now you have now you can work on a boat. You create the boat, and now you can go out fishing in deeper waters, and you can catch even more fish. Instead of 4 a day, now you can catch like 20 or 30 a day. Okay, great. Now you have more savings. Now you're producing more, so now you can trade those to other people that are not fishing. Maybe get shoes for yourself. Maybe get furniture, stuff like that. You're constantly sort of like upping your quality of life through the income that you're making, but that income depends on the savings, because the savings allows you to invest in the equipment and things so that you can earn more stuff. And and lest you think that this sort of fishing example is like sort of like rudimentary or whatever. Actually, this continues to this day. Today, you have these commercial fishing vessels that go out from Alaska or something, and it takes 5 years to build one fishing vessel. But you have a crew of 12 and they can catch like 50,000 fish in one trip, right? Like that's orders of magnitude greater in productivity per person, right? As a result of the savings. But that building that boat requires significant savings to get to. You don't just get to go and build this boat. You need to feed yourself while you're building it, and there's all kinds of parts that are needed and things like that. But once it gets going, now you've basically outsourced fishing to a very small minority of people, whereas it used to be lots and lots of people in fishing. And they had to use that. Instead, you can use their labor for all kinds of other things where, they might be making clothes or houses or, writing books or something, right? Like this is how civilization develops, is through savings, but you need that savings. Now, what fiat money does is very tricky because it looks good on the outside. They say, we're going to give you a loan for the boat and you can go and make that boat, and you're just going to pay us some of the profit that you're making afterwards. And that sounds good. And if it comes from private investment or something like that, which happens all the time, then that would be fine. Somebody is giving up opportunity cost somewhere. But the way fiat money does it is by expanding the money supply. They give you a loan of money by diluting everybody else. So really, you're stealing from everybody else to do it. Now, even that wouldn't be so bad if the incentives weren't so off, because once you get money from a money printer, you don't you're going to be a lot more wasteful, right? Like you might not really know how to build a boat, or your strategy for building the boat and capturing the fish, it's not really market tested, and you just sort of end up wasting the money. In which case, you got nothing for stealing from everybody else. Whereas with savings, you're going to be a lot more careful because it's your own money. Right. And that's what really builds civilization, is people that save, that accumulate capital so that they can make more stuff. And they're not doing it out of the goodness of their hearts, but it ends up being that way. It's what Holzman would call like a gratuitous good to everybody else, is that by creating this machine or whatever to catch more fish, as a result, you have an abundance of fish everyone can eat, and they don't have to worry about where their next meal is coming from, because fish are so cheap that I can make one pair of shoes, and I'm good at making shoes, so just need to make one pair of shoes a day, and that makes it better. Or if I'm smart, then I'll start going towards like scaling that and making more shoes, eventually a shoe factory where the product is consistent and so on. And this is the civilization that's been built over time, is people figuring out how to make efficient use of labor so that you can produce more and more stuff. And that's the modern world that we have today. The abundance that we have is a result of savings. So this is why savings is so important, and it allows for better productivity and the fulfillment of what people want, which is lots of stuff or things that you might want, and going after those. You can fulfill your dreams through saving.
And this used to be achievable by everyone, like you talked about there. But now you basically have to be one of these giant mega corporations in order to thrive. And there's so many moats built around them. And this is something I listened to your podcast with Preston Pish, and you guys talked about this, how fiat creates these monopolies where you pretty much, there's so few just gigantic mega corporations that were doing these things right now. Like an example is Amazon. You talked about these like mega ship boats out, catching all the fish. Like it's so hard to do that as an individual anymore, because it's just hard to live in general for the average person. And this leads to all sorts of downstream damaging effects, whether people want to talk about like environmentally, or want to talk about like Amazon just having terrible working conditions, and just all of these like these massive corporations who no longer have to really act in responsible ways. All that they need to do is suckle up to the money printer and just have enough connections within the money printing class to just have just enough of a moat around themselves that there can never be any competition. And I think that this is a huge part of this conversation around monopolies, because this is another thing we hear that the politicians talk about, how, oh, we're going to fix the monopolies by we're just going to go and break them up. But I think that there's a little bit more to that question, and it has to do with fiat and the fiat incentives that is creating all these just enormously disgusting, huge entities that control everything. Could you maybe describe that in a little more detail?
Yeah. So when you're printing money, the money has to go somewhere, right? Like you print an extra $2 trillion. Where does that money go? And that where that money goes determines sort of how things happen. So if you are a giant corporation, if you have a large part of the market, the incentive then is for you to keep the position that you have because things are good. And the way to keep that position is to just sort of like ossify everything, right? Like, here's the process, and we want to make sure that that's the only process that that gets done. And you do it in the name of safety, you do it in the name of efficiency or something like that. But that's ultimately what ends up happening. So, like a classic example is like something like seatbelts in cars, right? Now, like that was sort of like mandated at some point because the seatbelt manufacturer, well, first it was sold as a safety thing, which is true, but like, how do we know that there aren't more safe things that we could try? But because the government mandated, hey, you have to have this kind of seatbelt, we haven't tried anything, right? Like it's entirely possible we could have different restraining systems or different safety features that would be way better than a seatbelt, but it hasn't evolved at all. Like it's like the seatbelts that you have now are exactly the same as when they were mandated by the government in the 60s, right? You get this sort of like stasis after regulation. Similar thing with like commercial airlines and things like that. You have a stasis, and that's the incentive of the people in power. Or the people that have the monopoly at that point. But that essentially means that all the innovators get screwed, right? Like if you want to make a new type of seatbelt, right? Like some different sort of restraining system that might be more comfortable, or does extra stuff for you, or helps with your circulation. I don't know, whatever it might be. There's no market for you, right? Because the government basically eliminated that market entirely. And that's how a lot of these industries are, is that there's a staticness to them as a result of fiat money. And now in a normal market, when you have an innovation, they would that would outcompete, and then like these other companies would go down, and then this new company would go up, and that's sort of like that process of creative destruction that you have. But in a fiat economy, what happens is, well, there's this mega corporation, and they're in trouble, and let's bail them out, right? Like, and this is exactly what happened in 2008 with GM and Chrysler. The government decided, you know what, like they're getting outcompeted by all of these other corporate car companies in other countries. We're going to bail them out so that they can keep making their crappy cars. We're going to make them invest in all this stuff. And because the UAW is a big, voter base and so on. And honestly, like that's why you're not getting that much innovation in cars. So it becomes very static, and it's not a very good thing. And that staticness favors the big corporations that happen to have it at that moment. Now, companies still die, but they can survive a long time as a zombie company because they can essentially take government money and do, kind of like minimal things. And, that's what a lot of corporations right now are, right? Like every airline, I think, is a zombie company. Like IBM is probably a zombie company at this point. Even Facebook, to some degree, I feel like, is a zombie company. I mean, they're trying to innovate, but it's like a very, it's not a successful innovation, right? Like, how much has Zuckerberg invested in VR? And have nothing to show for it. I mean, it's like billions of dollars wasted that could have gone to something else. But
Remember
this,
Libra? They're
yeah,
like
I mean,
the
so
shitcoin they're
many
trying to
things.
make.
At least he didn't spend that much money on Libra. But like, this is how things become, because they have a lot more influence as a result of the money printer being able to bail them out, and that's what they do, right? Like IBM has very little new tech. They have lots of patents though, and they have really good relationships with senators and lobbyists. So they'll always sort of have, or I mean, they at least currently have some sort of services business, even though they don't manufacture anything anymore, right? Like all their manufacturing capacity they sold off to China. They used to have a Lenovo, really nice computer line that they sold off to China. Like they don't want to deal with it. It's much easier to grift and do rent seeking things. So this is how Fiat keeps things static. Is it gives power to the people that are that can get influence in the government, and that's how they survive.
Yeah, and I think my favorite example of this is one that you mentioned there, the airline industry. And as we talked about before hitting record, I do a lot of traveling, you do a lot of traveling. And you've written some really good articles on this. I forget the title, but I'll include in the show notes, basically talking about how there's so many examples of Fiat within the airline umbrella. And I have experienced this as well as my fellow travelers. We talk about this, and we can all tell that things are just getting so annoying. Like the flying experience is just getting worse and worse. And it's, people are like scared, like, is my flight going to get delayed or canceled? There's planes like falling out of the sky and crashing and killing people more often. That's not ideal. My favorite is on the website when you're going through your options of things you want to buy. Would you like to spend extra money on insurance in case we lose your luggage? And just these ridiculous things. And I'm just looking at this and thinking, why are things getting so much worse in this industry? And guess which industry is just constantly getting bailed out by the government? It's the airlines. And we saw this in COVID where, they kicked and screamed and said, we need a bailout because, people aren't flying anymore. We're going to go bankrupt. Daddy, please fill us with money. And they did it. So they got their bailout. And I'd love to hear, I think that's such a perfect example of just where they no longer have an incentive to be actual problem solvers. And there's no actual free market process of the bad, like the non-planners, the ones that aren't doing a good job, to get washed out, and the ones who successfully plan for the future take the places. And I would like to hear your take on maybe how that would actually go down, because I think most people hear these narratives like too big to fail, it's too important to fail, we can't let it fail, we need to bail them out with government printed money, which makes us all poorer, by the way. People think that, that's such an important thing. And the banks, we can't let the banks go down. They're too important. Tell me what people are getting wrong here and what actually happens when, if we just allow the free market to do its thing and wash out these problems naturally.
Yeah, I mean, airlines, I think, are a great example because they're heavily financialized, right? I suspect that a lot of these airlines are losing money on every seat. What's going on? Then how are they surviving? Well, they survive by financializing, and part of it is the airline miles program, which is basically their money printer. They sell them to credit cards and so on, and they book future revenue now by selling airline miles to other companies and so on. But that process of financialization is common with a lot of companies, right? Almost every major manufacturer of something has financing terms, and this is oftentimes like just money printed out of nothing. They get a bank partner and they use the money printed from the bank to finance something for somebody, and then they get sales now, and the buyer has to pay interest on it. But essentially, it's new money entering the economy through the loan, and they can book that as revenue. But this is this is a very common thing, the financialization of these companies to strengthen their balance sheet, cash flows, or whatever. It's essentially money printed out of nothing that comes in and looks like revenue or healthy growth or whatever, but it's really an accounting trick. It's using newly printed money as a means to look like you're healthy, and all these companies are kind of sick, and they should die, but they haven't. Now, your question was what would happen if these companies were allowed to die? Well, all of the capital that they have, right? Like this is like machines and things like that. They get put to other uses. Now they in a bankruptcy, they typically get sold to buyers to pay off whatever debt that they still owe or whatever. Those would go to entrepreneurs or other companies that are trying to build similar things. And if you have an airline that goes bankrupt, well, those planes get sold to somebody, and they come up with a better model. And there are lots of startup airlines that are trying different things, but honestly, like it's crazy to me that we don't have too many new plane designs and things like that. I was reading about drone technology and how that could possibly be you build the drone big enough, you can carry people in it, and drone tech's pretty good. And think about like point to point. You don't have to have like runways and things like that. And you can have smaller numbers of people. And maybe even the pilot doesn't even have to be on the drone or whatever. I mean, I wouldn't ride in one right now, but like it's worth looking into and figuring out if like can we do stuff with this that maybe like airlines aren't doing. And if I don't have to go through TSA or whatever to get on a drone, then maybe it's worth similar amount of money to and have it be maybe an hour later, but at least I don't have to go through TSA or something. Like, yeah, there's competition available and innovation available. It's just that none of that gets done because of fiat money. So if you take away a lot of this ability to bail out and so on, I think you get a lot more entrepreneurship, a lot of creativity, a lot of inventiveness, just because there's already a lot of tech that exists that we're not using in particular ways because of all the gatekeeping and regulations and things like that. So people come up with creative solutions when things go down. So once you have, say, an airline go down, okay, that like it kind of sucks for the people that were depending on that airline, but that also means that there's an opportunity for an entrepreneur to make money, like fulfilling those things. So a lot of these like especially like bailing out banks and things like that, if you let them fail, then a lot of companies might fail, and it might be worse for a time, but ultimately it ends up better because the capital and resources go to the people that are going to use them more effectively. And that's ultimately what you want in a civilization, is for the equipment and capital goods and things like that to go to the people that are going to contribute the most value, that make the most money out of it. And that ultimately builds up civilization.
Yeah, and it's just like we keep talking about how we need to stop trying to be anti-nature and do things the way nature intended. And part of that is, productive destruction. The bad stuff needs to get wiped out in order for the good to have fertile ground to grow on. And just so many examples of that out there that we can see going on. And you talked about financialization and how these airline industries have become these like bizarre like financial products of using their points and miles to stay alive. And they're completely dependent on money printing now to just survive most of the time. And that's why they are getting worse and worse. And it's just the experience for everyone is worse. The financialization process really affects individuals as well. And this is something you write a lot about in your work, how just this fact that, since we don't have a sound form of money at the base, instead we have this giant Rube Goldberg machine of just fiat incentives, loopholes everywhere, and it's just a huge mess. This affects so many people's lives that don't even realize it. And one obvious one is the talented people and maybe you could maybe take this one, but
Mm-hmm.
we have really talented engineers and just minds of all sorts who could be doing really beautiful things in this world, but instead they're getting hired off by these Wall Street firms and these giant financial institutions to find ways to cheat the system to make more money and game fiat basically. And this only exists because of this giant fiat game. And
Mm-hmm.
those people have to basically take these options because, as we've talked about, they are struggling financially, as the average person is struggling right now. They pretty much have to take these options and just sort of enter the belly of the beast. And when they would rather be doing things like being an innovator, an entrepreneur, create things, create art, create, cool things for our culture, but instead, there's no money there. They make more money by going into the financial institutions or any part of the fiat beast, so to speak. So what's going on there, and how does a sound form of money fix this problem and allow people to actually specialize in more beautiful, productive, fulfilling things?
Yeah, the sad reality of the last 50 years or so is that the best and the brightest that we've produced from the best universities, the smartest people, a significant number of them go into investment banking, and not because they're so passionate about investment banking. It's because that's where they can make the most money. Now, I don't begrudge people going into an industry because they can make the most money. I think that's a market signal, and that's totally fine. And a generation ago, I was reading about George H.W. Bush, right? And I think he had gone to Yale, and right afterwards he decided, you know what, the way I'm going to make my mark and how I can make a lot of money is by going into oil, right? And so he founded an oil company, and he figured out how to do some of that stuff, and he made a lot of money in oil. Now that's productive, right? Like getting oil and powering machines and making money that way. I don't begrudge anyone that, but the sad reality since about 1971 is that there's way more money to be made by playing financial games. And if you know anything about investment banks, the thing that they have that other banks don't is, pool of like deep liquidity. They're called like dark pools and stuff like that, where they can essentially print tremendous amounts of money to get leverage on certain trades. So you can do 100x leverage on an FX trade and make a few basis points, which ends up being many millions of dollars, on a few million that you risked or something like that. It gets kind of crazy, but that's what people would rather do rather than, like, I don't know, creating a new oil field and figuring out how to efficiently get that out. And that's a tragedy because they're essentially rent seeking and stealing from everybody else through this money printing, rather than creating goods and services that people want. And smart people for a very long time had that incentive to try to go and make a lot of money. And the market signals for certain things. Okay, well, this industry is hot right now because there's a lot of demand for it, or whatever. That's the industry that a lot of people would go in. And even over the last 20 years or so, a lot of smart people have been going into tech, and some of it's good, but a lot of it's actually like very rent seeky, right? Like the most depressing quote I think I've heard as a programmer is, I spend my life trying to get a few more clicks. And in a sense, it's true, right? Like this is the business model of Google, Facebook, and all these other tech companies. Is just getting a couple of more clicks is all that they're doing. It's not about like making the world better. It's just getting a couple more clicks, so you get referral rewards from the people that are advertising or whatever. It's not really like direct value that you're providing. You're just like stealing a few clicks that would have gone somewhere else, and so on. So it's ultimately kind of a zero sum game. Instead of creating something new and interesting and that people need or want. Now, the reason why a lot of these positions are so attractive is because they're much more likely to succeed than something risky like an entrepreneurial endeavor. And this is where I give credit to people like Elon Musk. He's actually swinging for the fences on a lot of this stuff, instead of, like taking the safe route, which is getting government contracts and things like that. So this is an unfortunate reality of having a money printer, is that they can offer you better salaries, better terms than being an entrepreneur would. And unfortunately, this adds to sort of like a debasement of civilization in general, because these are the people that should be making like new uses of nuclear, or creating new kinds of vehicles or clothing or houses or something. Like there's so much that they could be doing that would be beneficial. Instead, they're leeching off of everybody else through theft.
And the sad part is that we'll never know, because this is such a deep structure that's been imposed on us. And you're talking about the seatbelts earlier as an example. We talked about the airlines, like all these innovations that could have happened by now. And the classic example is the old TV shows from the 50s, all predicting that in the 2000s we'd have flying cars by now. And who knows, maybe we would, if there was an actual free market allowing the best and the brightest to actually innovate and create these things, instead of being sucked up by the money printer system, where no one's incentivized to take these risks, like you said, because they don't have the savings to do so. And I think that there's even more to talk about here outside of the actual stuff, though. And this takes us to what you talk a lot about also in your work, is just how fiat debases our culture, our relationships, marriages, and family. This is something I know that everyone out there should be caring about, is, the quality of our relationships, and, just our place in the world with the people around us and communities. I'd love to hear your base case for why fiat, as we like to use the word, debases these things that everyone should care about, the culture and society today.
Yeah, I mean, we can talk about relationships and community and things like that, and they are, I think, for most people, like the most fulfilling part of their lives, right? Is having friends, a family, and doing things in a community, and having people that love you and care about you and things like that. Unfortunately, what fiat money does is it scales things up too much and makes you dependent on the fiat system. So what do I mean by that? Well, we used to be in groups of about 150, right? Like that's Dunbar's number. It's sort of like a hard limit in your head as to how many people and relationships that you can have before you kind of lose track and can't figure things out anymore. And that used to be the size of a village or something like that. And you would have lots of relationships within that village, and maybe it's your extended family, or what you would call a clan or something like that. And you would know everybody, and you'd be on the same team, and you'd be working together, and you'd have and it was part of survival, right? Like you needed other people to survive. And if somebody needed like an extra hand at the, I don't know, goldsmith or ironsmith or something like that, you'd hire within your own tribe and so on. That system has more or less gone by the wayside, and part of it has been sold as sort of like being fair, or using it as a safety net or something like that. What about the people that don't have tribes, right? Or don't have clans? Like, what are they going to do? So we've fiat money has been used to sort of like give everyone pretty much a safety net. Now, safety nets can be good, but if you give everyone a safety net, now they don't need the thing that you need a safety net for, right? And unsurprisingly, what people end up doing is they depend less on relationships and more on fiat money. So it used to be that you live in a clan or whatever, you need somebody to take care of your kids for a little bit. well, okay, you have lots of relationships. Your next door neighbor can take care of your kid for a little bit, and you can take care for them. That dependence kind of goes away because of the presence of fiat money. Instead, now you start hiring people for that particular purpose, or you know if you're not rich enough, then you figure out ways to do it for less, or use government services in some interesting way, or just go on welfare of some type to handle that. And that brings up sort of like less dependence on the community and more dependence on government. And that's sort of like the slippery slope that almost everyone goes down, is that they like being independent, or they like not having not being obligated to people. So instead, they just sort of depend on the government, depend on the money printer, and that's become a reality in many ways. And people don't value relationships nearly as much. It used to be that you would care for each relationship very deeply and cultivate them and so on. People don't have that attitude anymore. Instead, it's like whatever is fun now. It's not really a long-term thing anymore. And that's kind of a sad reality, and it's depressing, and it sucks. But this is, I think, why so many people are unsatisfied with their lives. A lot of people are on antidepressants and things like that. Get addicted to lots of things. Well, part of it is because you don't have a community, and all these substitutes that the money printer gives you, they're ultimately not the same as having warm human connections.
Yeah, and it just feels like relationships are very transactional now. People are kind of just like you said, they're looking for, what can I get out of this person to help myself in this moment in the short term. And they're not thinking about the long term, because we can't think about long term for anything, as we've been discussing. The fact that we're just getting poorer all the time, it's harder to feed ourselves, and we can't buy a house. It feels like the world is shrinking in for so many people. So when that happens, people get into a more desperate state of like, how can I, plug up these holes that are inside of me, like, immediately, and not thinking about long-term ramifications. And that is, all sorts of relationships, from, friends to romantic relationships and everything in between. And in terms of just like marriage and having kids, I know that there's such a strong narrative that's been out there for so long of this fear of overpopulation of the world. Well, that turned out to be a huge lie. Birth rates are collapsing everywhere. I mean, it's completely falling off a cliff, and we still haven't seen the effects of this, because there's still that baby boomer generation just barely holding on by a thread. And once they start dying off, we're really going to see, oh my gosh, there aren't enough people to actually replace these positions and these jobs and these roles in society. And so the Bitcoin community is very well known of, they're having lots of babies, because we've seen this, we've dug to the bottom of this rabbit hole and realized, like, oh man, people need to have more kids than ever right now. Back in hundreds of years ago, it was completely normal to have like 10 kids a family. People are having huge families and really building legacies and dynasties out of their name, and that's just not happening anymore. Like, people used to have kids in their early 20s, and now it's more like mid to late 30s. A lot of the time, they're just like trying to have one, and they can't afford to have any more. They're both working jobs, and that's a super interesting one that I try to touch on as much as I can. But it's such a touchy subject for people for some reason. And this idea that we didn't used to need both the mom and the dad to be working. It used to be just the father would work and provide. He was like the traditional provider for the family, and the mother was able to stay home and raise the children. And when we talk about this on the internet now, it gets very touchy very quick, because the women say, "Oh, you're just a misogynist. Like, we want to be able to work and do all the things that men do." But I think that maybe there's more to it than that. Could you maybe give us your take on the situation of the traditional, familial roles, how they've changed, and how fiat has played a part in that?
Yeah, no, we've all been gaslit to believe that women working is like more freedom or something, when really it's just us all getting poorer, right? Like, one income used to be enough. Now you need two incomes. That means that things cost twice as much. That's
And it's still
basically
not
it. It's
enough.
a
They're still struggling. They have to send the
Yeah,
kids
and
to
they're still
daycare.
trying. It's debased that much. So everyone's getting poor. That's really all it is. It's not, there's patriarchy and all this other stuff. It's you're just getting poorer, like, and you're coping with it by saying, now I have a career and it's more fulfilling than a family. Like,
I'm
yeah, sure,
liberated. I get
whatever.
to go to an office every day.
Yeah, I mean, it's so stupid. But like the thing that sort of causes people to not have babies is what we touched on earlier. It's this inability to plan. And if the currency is debasing, it's very hard to plan. And especially if you're like living paycheck to paycheck, there's no room to plan. So of course people are not going to have babies because babies require a lot of planning, right? Like there's a lot of things that you need to like put into place and make sure are set up. I mean, there are babies that are born where things aren't planned, in which case they generally have worse outcomes than the babies where things are planned. So, like you want to plan, right? Like and I think people want to be good parents, so they're trying to plan, but there's no room for planning because they're poor and they've been their salaries have been debased, their lives have been debased, and then this is sort of like the natural situation that you end up in. You can't afford a home, you can't afford all the education things that you want for your child and so on. So they don't have any. Great. And of course, like the woman is working instead of getting pregnant and having kids or whatever, and they say, well, I'm choosing this. Are you really? Because like there's a lot of women that would like to have children, but they can't afford to. I mean, like that just tells you what's going on with the money. They don't make enough, so they're significantly poorer than a generation ago. It's just that they don't realize it, and they're coping with it by saying, actually I have more freedom or something like that, when in reality, well, clearly you have less children, and clearly you have less, like the things that make life more meaningful. So yeah, you don't have wealth. Like what can I tell you? That's just how it is, and this is what fiat makes you believe, I think.
And I'm at the age myself, I'm about to turn 30 soon. So
Mm.
the people in my social circle that I've sort of grown up with, I'm really starting to see these realizations being made at a very rapid clip on
Mm.
both sides of the gender spectrum. And
Mm.
the women that are now turning 30 and crossing into the 30s are realizing, oh, I guess I can't just like fight this magic, this biological urge that's like deep inside of me to create life. Like that is the
Mm-hmm.
women's superpower, is they get to create a new human. And
And that's where, I mean, like that's more miraculous than any like career that you're going to be able to
yes,
do.
yes,
It's so strange to me that's become the argument. But I want my career, then a baby. Wait, I like what career? Like Bill Gates can't have a baby. He could create lots of stuff, but that's not so. And whatever he makes is not going to compare to a baby. I'm sorry, but like it just doesn't make any sense to me that people think that way. That like their career is so important that it's more important than a baby. No, human life is worth more than your career. I'm sorry.
the word you use is cope, and I think that that is the best
Yeah.
word we can use here. Is people are sort of convincing themselves that these things that are clearly not important, like that job at Amazon or Microsoft, is fulfilling for their life and their legacy, when really they have to be there because they
Mm-hmm.
have to be able to pay the rent, which is getting more expensive, and afford food. And
Mm-hmm.
there's a very deep rooted issue here, and as we talked about today, it's the money printer, it's fiat money. So everyone's livelihoods are being sucked out from under them by their money being debased, and I think that's just the main thing that everyone should be talking about right now. They shouldn't be talking about the red team versus blue team fights on TV. Because they never talk about these core problems. They're always distracting with other policies which are downstream of the money being debased and all these problems.
Yeah, and your labor is not worth as much, so you're not able to afford things. And yeah, I mean that's a situation you find yourself. What you should be thinking about is, all right, what happened to the system, right? Like why is it so different right now? And how is it that I can't afford any of the stuff that I really want? Well, go dig into the money, because the denominator's been changing this whole time, and that's why you can't afford it. And you might cope and say, oh, it's career, whatever. No, it's just you're getting stolen from, and until you realize that the thief is the money printer, sorry, you're just gonna have to figure out some other way to cope, I guess.
Yeah. Jimmy, I'd like to start wrapping things up here with a bit of a speed round. And like I said earlier, I love how you have an article and a podcast about every single one of these aspects of society which people understand are important. And it's a great way of giving people little nibbles of like why this is so relevant to them. So I'm going to throw some things at you. Some of them we've talked to already, some of them we haven't, but just 1 or 2, 3 sentences just describing how fiat ruins these, how Bitcoin fixes it. Number 1, education. Actually, don't worry about the sentences. Just go off, because we probably should dig a little more into these. I guess that's a big one to just throw at you. It's 1 sentence.
Education has been formalized and made universal rather than specific and cater to the individual, which has completely debased it. The idea of universal education is founded on the premise that everyone can be whatever they want to be, which is completely untrue. I'm never going to play in the NBA, and neither are most people. But this is sort of like the delusion that they sell you to make education sort of like universal and equal for everybody. It shouldn't be, but that's why we don't have geniuses anymore. You don't have specifically catered education for each person, and so on.
Number 2, art.
Art has become a fiat game the experts tell you what's good or bad instead of you judging for yourself. Art used to be very obvious, right? And if you need an explanation for why something is good, especially something visual, then you've completely failed as an artist, because it's a visual medium, and you need an explanation for why the visual thing is good. Then you failed. I'm sorry.
And you mentioned Safety's book earlier, The Bitcoin Standard, which I will say, excellent pairing with Fiat Ruins Everything as your next gift basket for a loved one. He talks a lot about how, back in the Renaissance era, all of these, well, several eras, like not just that one, all of these enormous, incredible, beautiful architectural structures and artistic masterpieces and paintings we see in these museums, they were all created under a sound money standard. When these artists were able to save and do these commissioned projects while they held gold. And a big reason why, like you said, it's fiatified now to where people can't save their money. So artists have to like crank out like more and more and more like quantity. They aren't able to build these really long-term projects because
there's no incentive for them either, because if you are a famous artist, you can sign your name on a booger and people will buy it. Like it's not about the art anymore. It's about the artist. And if you're at the top of the hierarchy, you can sell anything with your name on it. And if you're at the bottom, it doesn't matter what you make, no one will buy it, or at least at the prices that they have. So it's a complete like rigged game at this point, and that's unfortunately the reality of art right now.
Absolutely. All right, so we met at the Beef Initiative Cattlemen's Feast in Nashville, so we got to do this one. How about food and health?
Well, I mean, everything has gotten debased as a result of fiat money. So think about it. If you paid $5 for an item, and the manufacturer doesn't want to increase the price because, and they're suffering from inflation. They don't want to increase the price because that makes it less likely for you to buy it, because if it's constantly going up in price, you're probably not going to buy it in the future because it makes it harder to plan, right? So they have to keep the prices more or less static for that reason. So how do you keep the price static while your, like, inputs are getting more expensive? Well, you can debase the food, right? You could scale up and stuff like that. But generally, you're going to debase the food and you're going to make it worse, and you're going to use cheaper ingredients that are probably worse for you. And that's what's happened. The food's gotten worse. There have been substitutes and things like that make your health worse as a result, and it's not really real food anymore.
And you're going to get a government who's incentivized to push cheap crap onto you. And when
the CPI doesn't go up, among other things.
Exactly. The CPI is one, and like I talked with Matthew Leshak about, and you did as well, how I mean, the example is the Super Bowl this year. There's a video of Joe Biden sitting around like a bunch of Oreo cookies and ice cream and potato chips, talking about like weirdly how great all this stuff is. And we have the Federal Reserve putting out a tweet a couple of years ago, like encouraging, like, oh, like tofu is a better option than turkey for Thanksgiving this year. Like, why does the Federal Reserve care about my food? And it's because they want to be able to massage the numbers more, and you can do that with cheaply made industrial crap. So you have all the big players in the fiat world incentivized to fool you and tell you meat is bad, buy our junk. Like, they don't want you eating the healthy food. It's quite a simple but crazy incentive structure is going on there. And one of the things they use to do that is the media. How does fiat change the mainstream media landscape and how the information flow happens in society?
Well, much of the media is funded by Pfizer and companies like that, which are doing it not because they're getting a return on the advertising. It's because they're able to influence the money printer through the democratic process. So they want to fund these news shows so that they come out good, ultimately to get more printed money. So you remove fiat from that, they don't have this incentive anymore. Their drugs have to win on their own merits, and not through arm twisting by the government and so on. So then if the funding goes away, now the news has to survive on its own. And already there are lots of news sources that do. A lot of podcasts are like that. There's a lot of news sources where they get zero funding from the Pfizers of the world. Those work fine, right? And it's up to people to like fund the things that help them, and true things tend to help you more than lies. So I think that's naturally where it goes.
And like everything else, when you just let the free market bring the best solutions to the surface, you get better results. And we're seeing that through the podcasting landscape, the social media landscape, and Nostr, which is another cool one we didn't even talk about today. But just these opportunities for people to have true free speech and ability to create their own micro mainstream medias, or I guess that'd just be micro media sources where people can like actually create content freely. And you get a lot more truth and a lot more value from these sources a lot of the time. And that's why people are really gravitating toward that realm, getting away from the TV set. That's just, like you said, it's just when you turn on any news channel, it doesn't matter which one it is, count on your finger how long it takes to see a pharmaceutical advertisement or a total junk food advertisement. One of these fiat things that's just pushed onto people. It's not going to be very long. Especially like throw on a sports event and it's funny how sports is just like a magnet to all the garbage, because that's the bread and circus of the modern age of just attracting the people who are just so brain dead that they have to watch other people doing something instead of doing something in their own lives. And it's just it's crazy.
Bread and circuses for sure. Yeah.
Awesome, man. Well, I think we've covered quite a bit for people today. I think that's a good way to start putting a bow on this one, Jamie. I really appreciate you coming by. Why don't we send people off with your closing message on why people need to study money and study fiat, and how deep this goes in our society to have a good version of sound money, and how Bitcoin is that solution?
Yeah, I mean, you need to because you can't afford not to at this point. I mean, you're paying more for your groceries. Going paycheck to paycheck. If you have any spare time at all, this is worth studying because the society is getting worse. There are people that are trying to pitch you solutions that don't make any sense, and until you study it, you're not going to be able to figure out what the right solutions are or how to even evaluate some of these solutions that they're proposing. So um, if you want to plan for the future, if you have a desire to do things in the future, if you have goals, dreams, study money because that's the thing that's going to get you there. And there is a path with Bitcoin, but you got to put in the work.
Absolutely. Couldn't have said it better myself. Jimmy Song, it has been an absolute pleasure chatting with you today. I really appreciate you taking the time to swing by, and I highly encourage everyone to look more into Jimmy's work, his book, Fiat Ruins Everything, his podcast, which is so underrated. Bitcoin Fixes It's a podcast, one of my favorites out there. And it's also completely evergreen, which is the way that I try to go with my podcast, because you can go back to this anytime. It's not like a current events type of podcast. It really goes through all these things we talked about in great detail. And that's where I got a lot of inspiration for this. So go look into Jimmy's work. Is there anywhere else people should follow you and get in touch with you if they'd like to dig further into your content?
Twitter, Nostr, Stacker News, LinkedIn. Yeah, there's a bunch of places that I'm on, but you can look up Jimmy Song on any of those.
Excellent. I will leave all those links in the description so people can find you. Jimmy Song, it's been a pleasure, my friend. We will talk soon.